You stand as a Roman guard outside a massive sealed stone chamber deep within Alexandria's palace complex. The merciless Egyptian sun hammers the palace walls above. But here in this shadowed corridor, the air hangs thick with the scent of cedar oil and the suffocating weight of history being written in real time. Behind those doors sits Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt, Pharaoh of the Nile, and the final descendant of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She is perhaps the most formidable woman the ancient world has ever witnessed. Yet for 7 agonizing days, she has been imprisoned behind these stone walls. From your post, you hear her moving inside. These are not the desperate sobs of a shattered woman or the piercing screams of someone broken by fear. Instead, you hear something far more unsettling. The measured rhythm of footsteps on polished stone, the whisper of expensive silk against marble, and occasionally her voice, low, commanding, deliberate, as though she's addressing an invisible royal court. You know with absolute certainty that she is completely alone in that cold, silent tomb. Before we descend further into the darkness of that chamber, you need to understand something crucial about Cleopatra's death. Almost everything you believe about her final moments is an elaborately constructed lie. The romanticized tale of the Egyptian queen clutching an asp concealed in a basket of sun-ripened figs is almost certainly poetic fiction designed to obscure a far harsher reality. The peaceful image of Cleopatra reclining on her golden deathbed, draped in fine linens, and surrounded by her weeping handmaidens, is propaganda, nothing more. What actually transpired inside those sealed chambers between August 1st and August 12th, 30 BCE, was something far more methodical, far more calculated, and far more revealing about the merciless efficiency with which Rome dismantled its enemies. This is not a simple tale of tragic suicide. This is the documented account of a systematic psychological operation, what modern intelligence agencies would call a psyop, designed to break the last pharaoh of Egypt before permitting her to die. The real question isn't how Cleopatra died, but why Octavian, the man who would become Caesar Augustus, needed her to die in such a precisely controlled manner. Why did he require 10 full days to orchestrate her end? Why not simply execute her immediately as a rebel and enemy of Rome? If you want to understand how power operates at its most controlled, calculated, and terrifying levels, then this story will show you exactly that. This channel, Histora, exists to expose the hidden machinery of domination and the ruthless logic of empire that shaped ancient civilizations, truths that sanitized history textbooks often prefer to bury. Let me pull back the curtain of propaganda and reveal exactly what happened during Cleopatra's final 10 days. The destruction of Egypt's queen did not begin with a serpent's bite. It began on August 1st, 30 BCE, as the empire she had built began collapsing into desert dust. Inside the massive ornate tomb Cleopatra had constructed for herself near the temple of Isis, Mark Antony lay dying. He had thrown himself upon his own sword in a moment of utter despair after being falsely told that Cleopatra had already taken her own life. But she was still alive. She had barricaded herself inside that fortress-like structure, a 2-story monument with massive wooden doors and virtually no points of entry. With her were her 2 most loyal handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, and as much royal treasure as they could transport. Gold, jewels, precious resins, wealth that Octavian desperately needed to pay his legions. Antony, bleeding and fading fast at the base of the tomb, was hauled upward by ropes through a high window by the 3 women. According to the historian Plutarch, his blood smeared the white stone walls as they strained to lift his weight into the upper chamber. He died in Cleopatra's arms, believing his life had retained meaning, because he was a Roman defeated only by another Roman, utterly unaware of the trap tightening around them both. Cleopatra had mere minutes to grieve before Octavian's forces surrounded her sanctuary. But Octavian did not order his men to storm the tomb or shatter the barricaded doors. He was a master strategist who understood that patience is a weapon. Instead, he sent a messenger, Proculus, with a simple, disarming proposition. Caesar wished to discuss the terms of her surrender and, more importantly, the future of her children. Cleopatra, ever the skilled diplomat, refused to open the doors. She negotiated through a narrow gap in the stone, demanding guarantees for her children's safety. While she was distracted by negotiations, Proculus's soldiers scaled the outer walls using ladders. They entered through the same high window used to pull the dying Antony inside just hours before. They took her completely by surprise, disarming her before she could use a hidden dagger. As they seized her, she screamed, "You will not take me alive. You will not parade me through Rome." But the soldiers had explicit orders: keep her alive at all costs. The moment they dragged her from the tomb and sealed her inside a guarded chamber on the palace's second floor, the true machinery of her destruction began turning. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments, like and share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can bring more such insightful and informative videos to you. Remember, the joy of spreading knowledge is best when we're all together. Octavian did not simply want Cleopatra dead. He needed her alive for a very specific strategic purpose. Egypt was the wealthiest kingdom in the known world, and it was now his. But back in Rome, he faced a catastrophic public relations crisis. He had just concluded a devastating civil war, Romans killing Romans. To justify the unprecedented bloodshed, he had to transform this internal conflict into a war against a foreign threat. He needed a villain. Cleopatra was the perfect candidate. The Eastern temptress, the Egyptian sorceress, the foreign corruption that had seduced and destroyed a noble Roman general. But there was a problem. Cleopatra was brilliant, multilingual, politically sophisticated, and deeply respected by many in Rome's elite class. She wasn't a simple caricature. Complicated enemies make for terrible propaganda. Octavian needed to simplify her, to reduce her to a symbol, a living trophy that could be paraded through Rome's streets in chains. His entire political future depended on the spectacle of the Roman triumph, a ritualized ceremony of humiliation, where defeated rulers were led through the city in chains, displayed before jeering crowds, and then publicly strangled in the Mamertine prison. Cleopatra understood this ritual with chilling clarity. She had been in Rome years earlier during Julius Caesar's triumphs, and had witnessed Vercingetorix, the Gallic king, and dragged through the streets and then executed. She knew with absolute certainty that Octavian intended to use her body as a political tool to cement his grip on Roman power. The next 10 days became an extraordinary psychological battle. Octavian's strategy was counterintuitive. He needed to break her desire for death. He needed to make her want to live. And to accomplish that, he exploited the only leverage she had left, her 4 children. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, and the 3 younger children she had with Antony, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, were separated from her and placed under heavy guard in different sections of the palace complex. On August 2nd, Octavian dispatched a different kind of messenger, Gaius Cornelius Gallus, a poet and diplomat who spoke the language of civilization and refinement. The message was elegantly cruel. Your children are safe for now, but their survival depends entirely on your cooperation. If you die, Caesar cannot guarantee their lives. Cleopatra found herself trapped in an impossible psychological prison. suspended between her royal dignity and her maternal instincts. To escalate the psychological pressure, Octavian sent royal architects to her chamber on August 3rd. They didn't come to negotiate. They arrived with measuring rods and wax tablets. They measured her height, the width of her shoulders, the proportions of her frame. When she demanded to know what they were doing, they replied with bureaucratic indifference. The display platform for the triumph must be constructed to accommodate your exact dimensions. They were measuring her like a piece of furniture, preparing the cage she would occupy during her public humiliation in Rome. They returned every single day for nearly a week, discussing the logistics of her degradation in front of her as though she were already a statue, an object, no longer human. This was systematic psychological conditioning. While architects measured her for captivity, other messengers brought carefully selected reports about her children. They told her how Caesarion was asking for her, how the younger children cried for their mother. They positioned guards so that the sounds of her children playing in the palace gardens would drift through her narrow window, close enough to hear their laughter, but impossibly far from her touch. Modern psychologists call this learned helplessness. By systematically stripping her of agency and making her completely dependent on him for news of her children, Octavian was attempting to dismantle her very identity. By August 7th, Cleopatra stopped eating entirely, choosing the slow death of starvation as her final act of defiance. Octavian didn't force-feed her. Instead, he brought her eldest son, Caesarion, directly to her room. The boy begged his mother to eat, telling her he needed her to survive so they could all remain safe. That night she ate. The abstract threat to her children was no longer theoretical. It had a face, a voice, and tears. On August 8th, Octavian finally visited her in person. He offered what appeared to be mercy. If she walked willingly in the triumph, without chains or struggle, he would spare all of her children, including Caesarion. It was a masterful lie. Caesarion, as the biological son of Julius Caesar, represented a direct threat to Octavian's political legitimacy. Octavian could never allow him to live. For 3 excruciating days, Cleopatra existed in the torture of false hope. But on August 11th, something fundamental shifted. Whether she overheard careless guards speaking freely, or received a secret message from a remaining loyalist, she finally understood the complete truth. Octavian was going to execute Caesarion regardless of what she did. The negotiations were theatre, the promises were hollow. Her cooperation would not purchase her children's safety, it would only guarantee her own public degradation and slow death in a Roman prison cell. With this realization, her path crystallized with perfect clarity. She requested permission to visit Antony's tomb one final time, to offer libations and prayers. Octavian, convinced he had successfully broken her spirit, granted the request without hesitation. Under heavy guard, she entered the tomb. The soldiers watched her pray and mourn, but they failed to notice her retrieve the small clay vial of poison she had concealed there days earlier, anticipating exactly this moment. When she returned to her palace chamber, she was utterly calm. She requested a final meal, including a basket of fresh figs. The guards inspected the basket thoroughly for concealed daggers, but found only fruit. They didn't realize the truth. The snake was never in the basket. The venom was already in her possession. On the morning of August 12th, the guards opened the chamber door to discover a scene of silent, absolute defiance. Cleopatra was dead, dressed in her complete royal regalia, reclining on a golden couch, as though presiding over her own final court. Iraz lay dead at her feet. Charmian was dying, while carefully adjusting the queen's crown with her final breaths. When a Roman guard asked sarcastically, "Was this well done?" Charmian's last words were, "Extremely well, and fitting for a descendant of so many kings." She had denied Octavian his living trophy. She had refused to be paraded, humiliated, and strangled for Rome's entertainment. In the end, Octavian still won the war of narrative. Unable to parade the living queen through Rome's streets, he commissioned a lifelike effigy, a painted statue of Cleopatra with a golden asp coiled around her bare arm. This fabricated image became the truth that survived for over 2,000 years, successfully transforming a political genius and master strategist into a tragic, lovelorn caricature. Caesarion was quietly murdered exactly 3 weeks later, strangled on Octavian's direct orders. Her 3 younger children were taken to Rome and raised as living trophies in the household of Octavian's sister, Octavia, Antony's abandoned Roman wife. They never saw Egypt again. They were displayed in Octavian's triumph as symbols of conquest, walking behind their mother's golden effigy in chains. Octavian's sophisticated psychological machine had failed to break Cleopatra's soul, but it succeeded completely in conquering her history. Today, the palace where she spent those final 10 days lies submerged beneath the Mediterranean Sea, lost to time, tides, and coastal erosion. All that remains is the haunting question of power. Was her suicide truly a victory? She chose the manner and timing of her death with absolute precision, but she could not control the story that followed, the story that reduced her to a romantic fool, undone by passion, rather than the brilliant political survivor she actually was. Her final act reminds us of a brutal truth about power. Sometimes the only choice remaining is not whether you lose, but how you lose, and whether you can deny your enemy the satisfaction of your complete surrender. If this exploration of power propaganda and the hidden machinery of empire resonated with you, subscribe to Script Historians. We exist to expose the truths that polished history prefers to bury. Thank you for watching,